Welcome to One Step News. I'm Michael Rommel. Today is March the 15th, and I'm bringing you 4 stories today. The first one's going to be on the situation in Mosul, where coalition forces continue to make progress against ISIL there. The second story will be on the argument between Turkey and the Netherlands, which seems to be intensifying but could calm down in the coming days depending on how each side decides to view the argument. The third is the investigation that has been opened against François Fillon in France, and a brief update on the French election as well. And then the fourth story is a fair bit about Trump and just U.S. political news. So if you already heard enough of that, just tune out after the third story. But I'm going to go ahead and begin with the first story, and that is the situation in Mosul. Coalition forces backed by U.S. and Iraqi airstrikes continue to make progress in the city of Mosul. They're doing a very good job against ISIS, but ISIS is putting up harsh resistance in the city. There are reports that most of the leadership in the city is already gone, and yesterday the leader of ISIS in Mosul was killed in an airstrike. So the city is almost retaken. However, there are a group of fighters who are basically acting as the vanguard in Mosul, who are using civilians as shields, who are maintaining the booby trap set up in the city, and basically making the last stretch of the campaign as hard as they can. And they're going to try to hold the city for as long as possible. And if I had to guess, I would say to expect some higher casualty numbers as a result of this. There are still over 600,000 civilians in the city, and thousands have already died in the retaking of Mosul. 200,000 have been displaced and are already in refugee camps, which have been struggling to deal with all the refugees, are now having to take an even bigger influx of them. So that situation is only getting worse. But hopefully coalition forces can take the city with as few casualties as possible and move on to eradicating ISIS in Raqqa and in parts of Iraq and Syria that they still hold. The second story today is the argument between Turkey and the Netherlands, which has been intensified on Tuesday when Erdogan basically accused the Dutch of being responsible for a massacre of Bosnian Muslims in 1995. This massacre was perpetuated by the Serbs, but they're blaming them for it because the Dutch had UN peacekeepers on the ground who did not intervene in the massacre because they were held back by international law relating to what UN peacekeepers can do in a situation. This comes after the Netherlands refused entry for 2 Turkish ministers who were there officially on government purposes, but were likely there to actually hold rallies to support Erdogan's new constitutional reform referendum. The referendum is the key thing here. The referendum basically gives Erdogan power to be a dictator. One of the powers included is the power to dissolve parliament, which is really all you need to know. He'd be the sole ruler if he so decided to dissolve parliament. Support for this referendum has wavered in the past few weeks, but he's got a strong base outside of Turkey, and over 5 million Turks live outside of Turkey, and they will also be voting in this referendum, and it's likely that he is trying to campaign to them to get this vote through. Now, this is technically illegal under Turkish law, and he's raised a lot of bad press in doing so. More news will come on this as the referendum happens, and I'll report the results of it and what it means for Turkey and for Erdogan, either way it goes. Now, the third story is just a quick one. French presidential candidate François Fillon is now under formal investigation for nepotism. He's accused of giving family members jobs where they didn't really do much work and just took a lot of government money. He looks like he might be guilty in this one, and even if he isn't, it's a killing blow for his presidential campaign. This basically leaves the field to just Macron and Marine Le Pen. There are a few other candidates, but at this point, it's going to be Macron versus Le Pen in the final election because the French election is 2 rounds. The first will bring it down to 2 candidates, and then it'll be Macron versus Le Pen. And this is a vitally important election, particularly for the European Union, because if Le Pen wins, there's a significant chance that the EU may dissolve. If France leaves the EU, it's in serious trouble. So more updates on that to come. Now, the final stories are going to be on Trump, and like I said before, if you've heard enough about him, feel free to tune out. But I'm just going to give you a brief rundown if you just want a condensed version of what's been going on last week since my last broadcast. So let's begin. The biggest news is obviously the healthcare bill proposed by Republicans in Congress. It's unclear how much of a hand Trump had in writing this. It doesn't include a lot of his promises, like dissolving state lines and making sure people stay on healthcare who got insurance through the exchange. There are some pros to this. It would benefit people who are wealthier, as it gives them tax cuts and also gives people some tax credits. However, this has been a heavily criticized bill. The amount of medical groups that have condemned it is astounding, and probably crucially for the Republicans, the AARP has come out against it, and they are a significant political force to reckon with. Now, this isn't to say Obamacare is perfect by any means, but it does have a lot of support in communities and even in Republican communities. So, a lot of Republicans are divided on how to vote for this bill, and getting them into line has proven very tricky for Ryan and other leading House Republicans. Whether they will march in line or not is hard to say. The Senate may be a big stumbling block for Republicans, as Democrats are staunchly against it, and pulling any Democratic votes in this is going to be nearly impossible. So getting this bill passed is going to be very difficult. Now, this could be a strategy to maybe bring in the demands later on and to actually propose a reform bill. It's hard to know with the strategy they're playing right now. So I'm sure there'll be more updates on this, as this has been a contentious issue since it was put into law several years ago. Another connection between the Trump campaign and the Russian intelligence services has cropped up. This is a possible connection, though, and it's unknown how deep it is, since it is a former Trump aide, Roger Stone. Roger Stone was the Trump aide in 2015 at the very beginning of his campaign, which seems like so long ago, but he was in contact with the Russian hacker, the alleged Russian hacker, Guccifer 2. And he's the man, woman, whatever entity that hacked the DNC. Now, what that conversation entailed is currently unknown, so we'll find out later. He has vehemently denied any sort of involvement with Russian intelligence services in influencing the election. He's called on Congress and on the Department of Justice to come out with evidence or to show the warrant they got the messages through. So we'll see how this develops in the coming days. Now, moving on, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has been implicated in emails that he used an alias while CEO of Exxon to discuss climate change with other high-level executives of Exxon. Now, it's known that Exxon has forged climate data in the past, so this is certainly not a new revelation necessarily. However, the problem comes in is that Exxon is currently involved in a court case to determine whether they misled investors and the public on climate change. With Rex Tillerson being the former CEO, he could be brought under charges for a possible misleading of the public. This is still in the preliminary stages of the trial, so we'll see how this develops as time goes on, and I'm sure I'll have more reporting to do on it in the future. Now, finally, the fourth and final story of the Trump team tonight is the row over the firing of Preet Bharara. And I apologize for pronouncing that incorrectly, but that's the best I can do. Now, I'm just going to call him Preet because I can't pronounce his last name well. But Preet was a U.S. attorney under the Department of Justice. He is quite a famous attorney, actually, known for his anti-corruption suits. He's prosecuted several prominent, both Democrats and Republicans in New York, and is known as a fierce fighter for anti-corruption. He met with Trump previously, and Trump had actually said that he would keep his job. Now, before I go into it, firing attorneys in the Department of Justice or asking for their resignation is standard practice. Trump's not differing from any other former president in doing so, but the way this was done is more just confusing than anything. Preet was promised his job by Trump, and he's also a well-known anti-corruption prosecutor. So this forced resignation or firing is more just bad publicity at the very least. There may not have been any, devious motive behind it. I'm not in Trump's head, and no one is. So it's hard to read what happened, but at the very least, it's bad press. And in a time where the Trump administration is under an extreme amount of fire, it may not have been the best press move, although at this point, I doubt he cares what the press is reporting about him. So with that, that's the end of the broadcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for tuning in. I'll be back Sunday with the Week in Review.